Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from the press box at the link, getting set for the Eagles' wildcard matchup against the Green Bay Packers. EJ, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Olivia. I'm excited for this game. I've spent a lot of time at the stadium. The Eagles have been practicing here all week, and I gotta say, it is a lot warmer today than it has been throughout the week. So I think we have some good weather for a good football game against two really good teams. So yeah, I'm excited to see the matchup, and honestly, I'll be honest, I'm also very excited for the show. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Everyone traveling from Green Bay feels like it's summer out here. That is the consensus. So beautiful weather for some playoff football. As always, you can be a part of our conversation. Head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day. Leave us a question, a comment, whatever's on your mind. We would love to hear from you. We'll answer some of your questions toward the end of our show today, and we'll also be chatting with you throughout the game. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit. All right, EJ, let's get into it. Both teams have been banged up. Both of them coming into this game pretty healthy, though, especially at quarterback. Jalen Hurts missed the last 2 games with a concussion. He returned to practice this week and has been cleared in time for this wild card game. Given the fact that Hurts has been out for these last couple weeks, he's finally ramping himself up in practice and is good to go. How much rust do you expect from the Eagles starting quarterback in today's game?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Obviously the last time that we really saw Jalen Hurts in extended action was against the Pittsburgh Steelers about a month ago. And that was a high note for him to kind of leave on. Obviously he missed the next couple of games. He missed most of the Commanders game and the following 2 weeks. So, I do think it's fair to wonder how the passing game is going to look. There were, high moments for the passing game. There were low moments for the passing game throughout the season. He ended the season, his regular season, on a high note. So I think that there may be cause for some optimism for that, but I also think just generally it's one of the bigger question marks going into this game. So I'm very curious. Throughout practice, obviously, I'd say he looked like Jalen Hurts. He looked pretty normal. He, didn't seem limited very much in the days that we were out here. Obviously, we're only out here for a little bit of time at the beginning of practice. But yeah, I think that there is going to be maybe a knocking off of rust in the early going. And honestly, it wouldn't be all that different than what we've seen from the Eagles offense throughout the season. They've kind of been prone to struggling on their first 1 or 2 series most of the season. So, it wouldn't be too out of character for them to come out of the gates a little slowly, especially considering the time that Jalen Hurts has missed.
Well, the good news for Jalen Hurts is that he will have his top receivers at his disposal, even though, again, a couple of them banged up due to injury. A.J. Brown dealing with a knee injury is something that he has been working through, especially in the latter portion of the season. He did not practice as the Eagles attempted to manage his load. And then Devontae Smith dealing with some back tightness. He missed Friday's practice, similar situation. However, both of them good to go, removed from the final injury report at the end of the week. The fact that you've got the 2 receivers plus Dallas Goedert back in the lineup after his stint on injured reserve. Goedert has only played, I believe, 9. He came back, so he played 10 games, including last week's regular season finale against the New York Giants. Hurts is going to have his full complement of receivers at his disposal. How much of a difference do you think that will make in the passing game getting going today?
Yeah, I think it'll be huge for the offense in general. Just the flexibility that they'll be afforded. Even if A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are maybe not quite 100%, obviously I think it's important to make notice of Grant Calcaterra played pretty well throughout the season in that tight end 1 role in place against Dallas Goedert. But I think the reputation that all 3 of those players have can work to the Eagles' advantage. The fact that Dallas Goedert is so effective both in the run and pass game. I've talked a lot on the show about what that affords Kellen Moore in terms of formational versatility, being able to run out of different looks. So there's a lot, that you can gain from having all 3 of those guys on the field, not just in terms of the talent that they have, but what they, allow you to accomplish offensively. So, we haven't seen very much of it this season. And, there are times where one of those guys kind of goes through a dry spell in the game because maybe the targets are going somewhere else. But the versatility, the flexibility that affords them, I think that is really huge going into this matchup.
Now we are still waiting for the inactives list for today's game from both teams. That being said, we are expecting Kenny Pickett to be good to go for today's game. Jalen Hurts' backup has been dealing with a ribs injury. He's been limited throughout the week, but he was removed from the final injury report on Friday. And then another change to the lineup, I suppose. Jack Driscoll placed on injured reserve on Friday. The depth offensive lineman. He comes out, and we're expecting to see Brett Toth active for today's game. He was signed to the roster on Friday in his place. So good news there for Brett Toth to get an opportunity. Unfortunate for Jack Driscoll coming out. Practice squad elevations, Paris Campbell and Kari Blossingame. So because we are in the postseason now, everything resets. So these guys who had previously run out of elevations are now able to play and be active and suit up for today's game. Now, on the other side, the Packers are dealing with some quarterback injuries of their own. That said, Jordan Love is good to go for today's game. He injured his right elbow in the season finale against the Chicago Bears. He was held out, not able to get back in the game. But he ultimately, it was just for precautionary reasons. Matt LaFleur said after the game that they could have allowed him to go back in if need be. Kind of similarly to Hurts, he ultimately worked his way back into practice that throughout the week, was full on Thursday and Friday. Similar situation for Malik Willis, his backup, who injured his right thumb in the game against the Chicago Bears. Also did not practice on Wednesday, or at least was limited on Wednesday, and then ultimately was able to go in full on Thursday and Friday. Everyone's got quarterback issues. Everyone's banged up at this time of year, EJ. But again, kind of similar question for Love. Do you expect to see any sort of rust or limitation for him, given the fact that he is working through this elbow injury?
Yeah, I think the fact that he didn't come back into the game against the Bears does say a lot. Maybe it was precautionary because, they were mostly locked into where they were in terms of seating. But at the same time, I do feel like it says something about the fact that he didn't come back in the game. I know that you were in Green Bay this week, and he was a little cagey at times about, what he was able to do, how much discomfort he was dealing with. I think that the fact the weather isn't super cold maybe will benefit him. I could imagine that. I mean, we've all banged our funny bone. I know that this is probably a little bit more serious for him, but I do feel like, the fact that it's not a cold day where it's going to be hard on his elbow, I don't think that is necessarily working in the Eagles' favor that much. But I feel like the fact that he's playing, these guys, I think that they typically do have a higher pain tolerance than some would expect. I feel like if he's out there, you can expect to see at least close to the level that we're used to seeing from Jordan Love. And he is, when he is right, one of the more effective quarterbacks, one of the more, capable of making plays downfield in this postseason field. So it's going to be a tough challenge for the Eagles, especially if he isn't, hindered by that elbow injury.
Love and Willis weren't the only players for the Packers who got banged up in that game. Christian Watson sustained a season-ending ACL tear against the Bears, and he is now out for the season. It's a big loss there for that Packers receiving core. Watson brings kind of a unique element to that group. He is their vertical, stretch the field kind of guy, their man coverage beater, and now he leaves that void. There isn't really a one-for-one replacement on that Packers roster that doesn't really, the receiving core as a group doesn't really have that similar wide receiver number one star player, kind of like how the Eagles have with AJ Brown. How do you feel like Watson's absence could impact the functionality of the passing game overall for the Packers?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what the Packers see from defenses has something to do with Christian Watson being someone who can stretch the field. He is that field stretcher for them, that vertical threat. Yeah, I feel like a lot of defenses need to have a safety over the top of Christian Watson to account for what he can do vertically. So I am curious to see if the Eagles can use a little bit more single high coverages. They don't necessarily have to shade it to one side or the other as much, but I do think it's important to point out, like, this Packers wide receiving core doesn't really have, you, like you said, it doesn't have that number one, go-to guy, but it's a well-rounded group. There's a lot of talent in that group. Obviously, I think we'll talk about some of those wideouts later in the show. So I think it'll still be a challenge, but I think maybe what the Eagles can do in terms of like how they can set up in the secondary, I do think it changes with Christian Watson out of the lineup.
Now we are still waiting for the Eagles inactives list. We've got the Packers, and there are no big surprises on there. Everyone who is listed as questionable is good to go for today's game, and that would include defensive lineman TJ Slayton, who is dealing with an ankle injury, inside linebacker Quay Walker, who has been sidelined for quite some time now with an ankle injury. That's a big addition there to the middle of their defense. And then safety Evan Wilson, also active after dealing with a quadriceps injury as well. We also just got the Eagles inactives list, so we will digest these together. All in all, nothing really notable. No big surprises or eyebrow raises in terms of who is in or out. Kind of as always, Eli Ricks is out. Nick Gates, Darian Kennard, Trevor Keegan, Anais Smith, Tanner McKee, of course, as always. So the standard run-of-the-mill inactives for the Eagles, which is good news for that group. All right, let's get into our latest headlines, big storylines going into today's game. And I think one of the things I was most intrigued by in this matchup is the fact that on either side, you have got two very talented running backs in Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, and both were running backs that were acquired from each team in free agency this offseason, ultimately have been great signings for both teams. When you look at the way that this season has progressed since that week 1 game in Sao Paulo, you see that both offenses have started to trend more toward a run-first approach. Get the ball in the hands of the running backs on early downs and try to take some of the burden off of the passing game. Josh Jacobs has had a lot of success this season, especially just in context in Packers franchise history. Of course, Saquon Barkley is having an incredible season in the context of not just the Eagles, but just in the NFL. Jacobs ranks number 5th in the league in rushing yards, obviously Barkley being the rushing title holder this season. The run game for the Packers is a really big part of their offense. They like to kind of try to marry the run with the pass and try to build off a lot of play action off of their success in the running game. When you think back to that week 1 game, they had a lot of success on the ground in general. It was the second most rushing yards that the Eagles allowed all season long, 163 rushing yards. Jacobs accounted for the most of it with 84. Jaden Reed had a big 33-yard touchdown on a handoff. When you look at how far this Eagles defense has come and how well they have been able to limit the run in most weeks, what is the key for them to continue to have that success in being stingy and trying to limit Jacobs on the ground today?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be maybe the key to the game, if not one of the keys to the game, is how they fare, especially on those early downs. Like you mentioned, these are the two most run-heavy teams on early downs in the NFL. I thought the Eagles would have had that metric, sewn up by how much they've run the ball on early downs, but the Packers somehow run the ball even more than them on early downs. So I think that is, like I said, I think it's going to be the key to the game. Is how do they do it? I think they're going to have to win that first down battle, because you mentioned, like the way the Packers offense is set up, they are most dangerous when they are in favorable down and distances where they are, like, I'd call it a neutral situation where, you don't know if they're going to pass, you don't know if they're going to run. That's when the play action game unlocks. That's when you can take those deep shots. You can try and suck in the linebackers, take those, shallow crosses that can go for, big gains if you're not careful. So I think we saw a lot of that in the opener. We also saw a lot of times where Avonte Maddox got beat in the opener. And we also saw a lot of poor tackling from the Eagles defense in the opener. So, in terms of like, what am I actually worried about for the Eagles? What do I think the Eagles will have probably spent a lot of time preparing for this week? I think it is that early down run battle, getting them into 2nd and 12 instead of 2nd and 6. I think, if they can do that, it really does change how the Packers offense functions in a favorable way for the Eagles defense.
Together a little bit more under new defense.
So we're going to move to the Packers defense. The Eagles got the first look at Jeff Hafley, the Packers. I think Olivia's back. So, I'm gonna let you do the hosting, Olivia.
We're doing good. It's all good. Thank you, EJ, for stepping in. As you mentioned, picking up where you left off, Jeff Hafley is the Packers' new defensive coordinator. Not so new at this point, but now the group has come together considerably under him in his first year in Green Bay. They have been quite stingy themselves, number 4 in the league in EPA per play allowed. That said, one of the big differences between the group now versus the group that we saw out there in Sao Paulo in week 1 is the fact that the Packers are currently lacking their top 2-time Pro Bowl cornerback in Jair Alexander. He tore his PCL earlier this season and then finally underwent season-ending knee surgery just a couple of weeks ago. So he is done, out, not playing in today's game. We are expecting to see Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine start on the outside in his absence, as they have in recent weeks. Now, I'd say the group as a whole has fared pretty well, the secondary. However, there's a pretty clear drop-off without Alexander out there on the field. According to Next Gen Stats, the Packers have allowed a 9.7% lower completion percentage, with Alexander on the field versus when he is off of it. So I think that is a pretty clear difference there between the two secondaries that the Eagles are going to face or will have faced in week 1 compared to today. How much of an advantage do you think that they have in the passing game given Alexander's absence?
Yeah, going into this week, I would have said that that was the key advantage for the Eagles offense. Obviously, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith having small, like minor injuries definitely changes that a little bit, but I still think, like you mentioned, like these guys, Carrington Valentine and Keyshawn Nixon, they're good players. You know, it's not like these guys are stiffs or it's not like these guys are total liabilities out there, but I do think the Eagles like their matchups with their wide receivers in pretty much any game. And I do think that they do have the matchup advantage out on the perimeter. So, I feel like maybe that's not how you set the table. I don't think you go away from what the Eagles offenses look like all season, especially given the injuries to Devontae and AJ throughout the week. I think maybe managing that workload will be important and not maybe trying to lean on them too heavily. But I do think that those opportunities should be there. I think there's going to be a point in the game where the Eagles are going to need the passing game to really turn it on. And I think they should have opportunities with the matchup advantages they have on the outside.
Now, the Packers defense has also had a lot of success in stopping the run in recent weeks. Since week 12, they are averaging 70.4 rushing yards against, which is a pretty low number. And I think it says a lot given the fact that they went up against the Minnesota Vikings in one of those games, and they have a pretty decent rushing attack with Aaron Jones, former Green Bay Packers running back, at the helm. One of the big reasons why the Packers defense has been successful in recent weeks is because of the fact that rookie inside linebacker Edgerrin Cooper has come on as well at the same time. So in the last few games, he has been able to start, and because Quay Walker has been out and injured, he will be coming back into the lineup. So it'll be interesting to see how they distribute the snaps and get them working together, something that they haven't had to do very often this season. But the fact that Cooper has slowly kind of improved throughout the course of his rookie season, especially stopping the run and being able to use his length and explosiveness in the run game, getting behind the line of scrimmage and blowing up opposing teams' rushing attacks. He has 7 tackles for a loss in the run game just in the last 4 games, 3 of those being starts. 4 of those tackles for a loss came against the Minnesota Vikings. So, big game, big performance against a division rival. When you think back to Saquon and his week 1 performance, had a lot of success on the ground. It was his big coming out party, I suppose, as his first game in an Eagles uniform after signing that big free agent contract in the offseason. He was both he was explosive, just not only as a rusher, but also in the passing game as well. But if you look just specifically at what he was able to do on the ground, 109 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on 24 carries. I think, honestly, the Packers probably feel pretty good about that, except for, a couple explosive runs there. What do you feel like, looking at the Packers' successes in recent weeks in stopping the run? What is the key for the Eagles to continue to be as potent as they have on the ground and making sure that Barkley is as successful as he has been all season long?
Yeah, I am really curious to see what it looks like with Cooper as a part of this Packers defense. But in general, I think that the thing that the Eagles are going to have to do is stick with the run. I think there are going to be probably times where the Packers do get the better of them. Like you mentioned, they're a good run defense, especially recently. So, we've seen this team kind of stick with it at points during the season, even if it was slow going in the early parts of the game. Even if there are a couple negative runs on the opening drive or, first few drives, I think it's important to remember, like, a lot of Saquon's biggest runs have come in the second half of games or, as they sort of figure out what works or wear down the opposing defense. So I think that's going to be important, as it has been for most of the season. I think not necessarily getting away from it if it's not working. So, I think as much as I said it was the key to the game, for the Eagles defense to stop the Packers offense, I think it's kind of the inverse too. It's like this Packers defense is going to have to keep the Eagles out of those favorable down and distances for the same reason. They're built in a way where they can take advantage of those looks.
All right, let's get all of our friends involved over on Inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. Let's take some of your questions, your comments. We'll start with this one from R. Stothard. If Hurts doesn't hang on to the ball too long, the Eagles will win. I think Hurts has throughout the season, his time to throw is among the highest in the NFL. But when we saw in that most recent game against the Steelers, EJ, you talked about how well he played in that game. We saw him getting the ball out in rhythm, trusting his protection, not ditching the pocket too prematurely when there wasn't pressure, which is something that we have seen from him at times throughout the season. How much is Hurts and the fact, like, his ability to distribute the ball in a timely manner, a key to this Eagles win?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important. It's not to say that the Packers are like one of the most pressure-heavy teams in the NFL or anything like that, but I do think in general, just because of what we've seen from the passing game, I think we can all agree it's been at its best when Jalen Hurts is in a rhythm, when he's able to get the ball out quickly, when he's not trying to do too much. So I feel like that's going to be key for them today, just because of the fact that especially coming off of the long layoff that Jalen had, I guess you maybe wouldn't call it a long layoff, but the fact that he's been out of the lineup for a couple of weeks, I think it's important to get him going early with some, short to intermediate throws, get the ball out of his hands quickly, and kind of, again, like, they always equate it to a basketball player. You want them to see the ball go through the hoop a couple of times. I think that'll be important, not just early, but throughout the whole game to keep him in rhythm.
Thank you so much for your question. Let's go to this question here from Goldie. They say that they think that the Eagles are a better team than the Packers. That said, the Eagles still have to go out there and prove it. The Packers have not had a lot or really any success against teams with really strong winning records throughout the season. The Eagles, and including the Eagles, obviously in week 1, and then losing that game against the Chicago Bears, which I think was, I'll use my own opinion. I think it was pretty much an embarrassment for that Packers team that they weren't able to come out with a win, even with the fact that Love was sidelined for part of that game. Do you agree? Do you feel like the Eagles are the better team on paper? And is there any potential weakness that you think that the Packers could exploit?
Yeah, I do. When you look through the starting 11s for both teams, starting 22s, whatever you want to call it, when you look across the rosters, it stands out. It's like almost stark how many of the Eagles players you would pick over the Green Bay players in those situations. I mean, they do. I think the Eagles do have a pretty clear talent advantage, but that said, like, the Packers have. I mean, I know they're 11-5. They're a number 7 seed, but they play in a very tough division. Their losses have come against, the Vikings, the Eagles, and the Lions, like those, and I guess the Bears, and in the final week of the season. But for the most part, we've seen this team have a lot of success throughout the regular season, and really only struggle against the types of teams that they're playing today, the Eagles. So I'm curious to see, like, how this matchup is going to go for that reason. I feel like it's weird to say that I could see the Eagles making it to the Super Bowl, but I could also see them losing in the wild card round of the Packers. But I think that both of those things are true because the Packers are, a little bit more of a feisty 7 seed than you'd expect to see.
Had to pick, who would it be?
So yeah, we're going to go with the player picks here. I'm going to go with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. I know we've talked about them a little bit already in the show, but I am just mostly curious. I will be watching them because I want to know how close they are to 100%. I feel like, there's a lot. Obviously, they both are going to be playing. They're going to be out there, but what versions of those players are they going to be getting? Because I feel like, this passing game has been very dependent on them being who they are, not being, shells of themselves, or, not quite the difference-making players that they typically are. So, yeah, I'm really curious to see, especially against this Packers secondary, what it's going to look like with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I think there are going to be moments in this game where they're going to need those guys to win those matchups. Whether or not they're able to could be the determining factor for if the Eagles offense can kind of stay afloat against this Packers defense.
Mm-hmm. I think those are some good picks from you, EJ. I am going to go with the other side of the ball. I am most intrigued to see how Cooper DeJean is going to fare in today's game, mostly because he did not have a starting defensive role in week 1. That was Avonte Maddox starting in the slot, and now the Eagles have come a long way with DeJean taking over after that week 5 bye week. He has been one of the stingiest slot cornerbacks in the league. He ranks number fourth in the league in yards per snap, according to Pro Football Focus, which is pretty high praise, I would say, and pretty impressive from a rookie cornerback. Now, his matchup is going to be with the Packers' leading receiver, most likely, who lines up in the slot quite a bit, in Jayden Reed. He leads the team with 157 receiving yards, but they also like to hand the ball off to him, too. He's got 163 rushing yards on the season. The Eagles are well acquainted with what he can do, especially on the ground. He had a rushing touchdown, a 33-yard rushing touchdown in that week 1 game. If you think back to that, that was not Avonte Maddox's best moment. He did not fit that run very well, and ultimately he took it to the house for 33 yards and was able to score a touchdown. So I'm curious to see how much better the Eagles are off now with DeJean starting in the slot. Not only is he really strong in coverage, but he has been a great run defender defender for them as well. And I think that could really pay dividends going up against Jayden Reed. Again, knowing the fact that the Packers, their receiving core is depleted without Watson. I am sure there's no doubt in my mind Matt LaFleur is trying to get the ball in Jayden Reed's hands today. And I think DeJean could play a big role in trying to limit that aspiration from the Packers offense. All right, let us get into our predictions, take out the crystal ball. And before we do that, we are going to welcome in our colleague, Jeff McClain, who is going to give his matchup to watch in today's game. How you doing, Jeff?
Hi, guys. How you doing? So I was thinking about going with Edgerrin Cooper and his matchup versus Jalen Hurts. I know typically you think about maybe more the safety, the middle field defender, in the post when you talk about a matchup in the secondary in the passing game with the quarterback. But Cooper, and I know you guys have talked about what he's brought to the run game once they started him as a starter. But this is a guy that as a pass defender, and I mean that in terms of like how he blitzes and whether whether he may spy against Jalen Hurts. That's what I would keep an eye out on this game. I don't know if he's necessarily going to spy every day, every pass down, but I think there's going to be times when you're going to see him kind of mush rush or just kind of hang around to limit those scrambles that Jalen has pulled off his entire career. A lot of them on third down. I think when he struggled throwing the ball this year, one thing that he has been able to rely on is his ability to pick up first downs with his legs. So that's going to be something I'm going to be watching. And Cooper, I mentioned obviously the blitzes. They don't blitz a lot. Jeff Hafley's doesn't blitz as much. I think, the Eagles probably are less than them in terms of how much Vic Fangio blitzes, but they will. And they will show a lot of those double A gap mug fronts that you see from certain defenses. Maybe they'll drop out. Maybe one guy will drop out. Maybe one guy will go, whatever it is. And, those can be confusing for a quarterback. And both Quay Walker, who's active, he came into the game with an injury, but he's fine. And Cooper are both effective blitzers when they do go. So I think that's something that Jalen's going to have to, he's in charge of setting the protections. He's going to have to keep an eye out for that the entire game, because we've seen when he can get pressure, when there's pressure in his face, that's when he typically struggles and doesn't see guys down the field that he needs to be getting the ball to. So that's kind of my matchup to watch. And I think it should be an intriguing one.
Absolutely. Jeff, a rematch between two teams that faced off in week 1 in Sao Paulo. Now they get to go at it one more time here domestically. What is your final score for today's game?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I think the Eagles are the better team. I originally had 27-20. I think it's going to be bigger than that, a bigger margin than that, if they're winning. You see it typically in these playoff games. We're seeing it right now with the Bills. They're just a better team, and they're beating them pretty good. The Broncos, that is. And I think that is the case here with Philadelphia. Yeah, do the Packers have a path to winning this game? Absolutely. They're probably one of the stronger seventh seeds that we've seen when the Eagles have switched and when the NFL has switched to more playoff teams over the last several years. So this is not an easy matchup for the Eagles, but it's one I think they can win comfortably because they have so much of an advantage up front in the trenches, and that's where these games are typically won and lost. So I'm going to go with my score. I originally said 27-20, but don't be surprised, I think, to see a double-digit win.
All right, EJ, where is your head out at going into this game, and what is your final score prediction?
Yeah, I have the Eagles winning 27-24. I see what Jeff's saying about the potential for this to be lopsided. I could see a lopsided Eagles win. I could see a close Eagles win. I could see a close Packers win. I couldn't see a lopsided Packers win. So I think that kind of speaks to, what Jeff's getting at here. I think that I just think the disjointed passing game. There have been times this season where it hasn't looked good. The fact that Jalen's coming back from the injury, didn't have a lot of practice time with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I could see them coming out and kind of putting that all to bed. Obviously, they played well against the Steelers, but I also think that there's potential for it to be a little bit, again, stumble out of the gate, like I said earlier. So just because of that, I kept it a little bit closer just because I was a little nervous about what the Eagles offense is going to look like with all these moving pieces. But in general, I agree with Jeff. I think the Eagles are the better team. I think they win.
I am also keeping it relatively close. I have the Eagles winning 24-20. I can see everything that you said, Jeff. It's, trying to logic this one. The Eagles certainly have the advantage just about in every aspect. Again, the big question mark being, is Jalen Hurts going to look as good as he did against the Pittsburgh Steelers about a month ago, or is there going to be a little bit of rust that he's going to have to shake off? I think the biggest path for the Packers to potentially win this game is if all of a sudden Jordan Love from 2023 resurrects and comes out here and looks as good as he did in the wild card game last year against the Dallas Cowboys when they were able to pull off a pretty stunning victory. That said, he really hasn't been that quarterback this year. So I think when when that is the case and the Packers have been what they have been, and Love has had his inconsistencies, especially in the last few weeks, I think you have to believe them for what they are. And that's why I've gone with the Eagles, just because of their talent advantage over the Packers in just about every facet, every category. So I'm excited for this game. It's going to be a really good one, I think, and we'll see how it all shakes out. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us at Inquirer Live at Gameday Central. Just as a reminder, you can head already over there. We'll be chatting with you in real time throughout the game, so we look forward to seeing you over there. And as always, you can keep up with more Eagles coverage from Uncovering the Birds podcast from our colleague, Jeff McLean. New episodes are released every week, and you can listen to wherever you get your podcasts or go over to inquirer.com/podcasts. That is all for
Thanks
today,
for the help
everyone.
there, Olivia.
Thank you again for tuning into Gameday Central anytime, Jeff, and we will see you next time.